how to be brave, right? The first week, a couple weeks ago, we talked about not being anxious, right? And to breathe, right? The second week, we were talking about focusing on what's true and not on what distracts us. And then last week, we learned how having faith, no matter what the report says, we have to have faith. So as we close out the series today on how to be brave, we're going to look at how we can see God's strength and supply through our weakness and need, to see it through. Who has ever been told to see it through? Me? Yeah. Normally, we hear this when we're having a tough time, and you think you can't make it. It could be a rough week, it could be a college course, Josh, right? Yeah, or a project. Or you could just be a parent with children and you just have to see it through. They're almost 18. They're almost 18, right? Yeah? Yeah? They're almost 25. They're almost 25. But thinking about seeing it through, I'm reminded of the song Your Love Never Fails, and specifically the second verse where it says, "The chasm is far too wide, I never thought I'd reach the other side, but your love never fails." Sometimes, maybe a lot of times, you may think that whatever you're going through, that chasm is far too wide. But we need to see it through because God will never fail us. And think about this. God didn't bring you this far to just bring you this far. When I was growing up, there was a movie that my brothers and I used to really like to watch, and it was called The Sandlot. Anyone remember The Sandlot? I know Amanda likes The Sandlot. It came out in the 1990s, but it was set in about 1960-ish. And the main character, his name was Scotty Smalls, and he moves to a new town with his mother and stepfather. And he doesn't really know much about sports at all, but he meets a group of kids that play at the local sandlot. And they kind of take him in and they teach him how to play baseball, and one kid in particular throughout the movie is always saying, "You're killing me, Smalls." And because he doesn't, again, know much about baseball. Well, Scotty realizes that after he plays with him a little bit, he realizes that they don't really have as many baseballs as a normal team would. What happens is they hit these balls over the fence and they go into the back junkyard of Mr. Myrtle. And Mr. Myrtle has a big dog named the Beast. And it's rumored that this dog has eaten a child foolish enough to hop over that fence. So they don't go and get the baseballs at all. They just play until they're all out. Well, one day the team leader, Benny, hits this last baseball smack over the fence. And Scotty has an idea to allow them to keep playing baseball. He goes home, grabs a baseball from his dad's prize collection and brings it back. But that ball is hit over the fence. And Scotty explains to his friends that this baseball's special, I need to get it back to my stepfather. And he says that it's signed by Babe Ruth. And the other kids freak out because, again, Scotty doesn't know who Babe Ruth is because he doesn't know sports. So again, they say, "You're killing me, Smalls." So the team constructs a progressively complex series of machines to recover the ball remotely through the fence, protecting them from the Beast. But each attempt ends in failure, and the ball grows increasingly damaged due to the Beast. And all hope for retrieving that ball seems lost. Now, in our reading today in 2 Kings chapter 6, we hear the servant being afraid, saying, "Oh no, my Lord, what shall we do?" Elisha and the servant were surrounded. The servant thought, "Sure enough, we're done for." Elisha then prayed, and let's pay attention to what he actually prayed for. He prayed, "Open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see." And the Lord opened the servant's eyes. He looked and saw that the hills were full of horses and chariots of fire. God's armies were surrounding Elisha's enemies, not Elisha and the servant. When troubles like fear and anxiety seem right on top of us, and we don't feel brave, we can look through them to see that God is right on top of those fears and anxieties. Now, let's put ourselves in this situation. If you're trying to retrieve a signed baseball signed by none other than the great Bambino, you would too want that fence between you and the beast. Often we wish that for our same lives. We think that God's armies would be between us and our enemies. But God works in ways that we don't always understand. God surrounds us from the outside in, assuring us that He is in control of everything, even when we are feeling like we're being attacked. Did you notice how Elijah prayed? He didn't pray for God to send help. He prayed for the servant to notice and see that God's help was already there. How do we see God working our lives? Do we see through the fear? Can we see that help has already come? God didn't bring you this far to just bring you this far. Well, after coming to terms with the fact that the boys couldn't retrieve this baseball, Scotty prepared for the worst. And that very same night, Benny, the team leader, has a dream where Babe Ruth comes to him in a dream. And he encourages him to follow his heart. And he tells Benny, most people never take a chance, either because they're too scared or because they can't see it. They can't see through it. And he ends their conversation by telling Benny, someone is trying to tell you something. I think you should listen. So, inspired by his dream, the next day, Benny climbs the fence to retrieve the ball himself, even though his team doesn't want him to. Benny is brave, and he has found strength. And we read about strength in today's scripture as well. In Philippians, Paul proclaimed that he could do all things through Christ, who gave him strength. And that his needs and supply were from in and through Christ. Paul knew that God was always with him. As we see in today's scripture, Philippians 4:12 and 13, Paul writes this, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. How many of us can say the same? Do you know what it is to be in need? Do you know what it is to have plenty? How about being hungry or well-fed? Anyone ever? I get hungry all the time. Right? I mean, we all, and I also know what it is to be well-fed. I mean, we all can kind of relate to this, but sometimes we don't see the forest, what's that saying? The forest within the trees? Is that right? There you go. We don't see God on the other side. Psalm 121 verse 1 and 2 says, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. When are we in need? God will supply. Well, as the dust settled and Benny gained his footing, he's now on the side of the junkyard, and he sees the ball in the mouth of the slobbering beast. And this beast is a large dog. It's an English Mastiff. Has anyone ever seen those types of dogs? They're huge. I'd be scared of it too. And the beast drops the ball, and it rolls closer to Benny. And we hear spaghetti western music coming into play, and the eyes of Benny focus on the ball, and then we see a close-up of the dog's nose sniffling. And like a flash, both Benny and the dog go after the ball. Benny slides, grabs the ball, doubles back, and hops back over the fence to safety. But then everything's quiet, a little too quiet. The boys look up and see the beast is jumping over the fence, over into the sandlot, and then a chase ensues. Has anyone ever had this happen to you? Not necessarily a dog chasing you, but have you ever thought that you cleared the hurdle, you cleared the fence of whatever you're struggling with? You clear the fence and you're back onto the side of safety, only to realize that you have this big English Mastiff chasing you. We have many things that chase us. They don't have to be the dog, the beast. It could be fear, depression, addiction. And we end up just constantly running around from whatever that is. We don't see things through to the end. Well, Benny ends up doing this. He leads the beast on a lengthy chase back to the sandlot eventually, and then the fence collapses on the dog, pinning the dog down. And overcome by the fear of the beast, Scotty and Benny free the dog and return to his owner, Mr. Myrtle. And this is important because they could have done this right from the get-go. They could have just gone around the block, knocked on Mr. Myrtle's door, and gotten their ball back. And it's a good comparison because we do the same thing. We try and run around all trying to do everything our own way when all we have to do is knock and God will provide. But again, that's why they call it hindsight. Well, they finally do this and they talk to Mr. Myrtle, and he reveals that he's a retired baseball player himself who knows Babe Ruth personally, or knew Babe Ruth personally. And instead of the chewed up, mangled Babe Ruth signed baseball, he gives Scotty a baseball signed by the entire 1927 Yankees team. And again, this is a good comparison because we do the same thing. We hold on to things that we think we need, and we don't see through to the other side of what God truly wants to give us. But they do see it through, and they do receive something far greater than what they had. And I'm not just talking about a new signed baseball. They got to know what the beast's real name was. His name was Hercules, and he became the team's mascot. And they got to meet Mr. Myrtle, who they would constantly visit. We don't fully understand what we have until we actually knock and listen. When we trust in God and we see through the tough times, we can truly see everything He's given us. Ephesians 1, verse 18 to 20 says this: I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened in order that you may know the hope to which He has called you, the riches of His glorious inheritance in His holy people, and His incomparable great power for us who believe. God didn't bring you this far to bring you this far. Seeing things through can be tough. Yesterday there was an Eagle Scout ceremony here, and it was fun to watch and listen. It's tough being a scout these days, especially in today's world. This is just a small portion of what it is to be a scout. You have to be trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And that's just the basics. And again, you would think that we all should have those qualities. But in today's world, it's tough to be a scout, let alone being an Eagle Scout. This scout, he earned his 12 requirement patches or merit badges, 19 elective ones. He had 50 months of leadership skills, 66 hours of service projects plus his own service project, approximately 325 different requirements he did. Talk about seeing it through. That's a tough feat for anyone to accomplish, let alone being a teenager while doing so. Do you think that there were times where he wanted to quit? Sure. Were there times where he didn't think he could make it to that Eagle Scout level? Absolutely. Were there times where he wanted to quit, but his parents kind of, nagged him? I'm sure there was. But did he see through and feel the blessings that God has given him through this achievement? I'm definitely sure he did. We need to follow through even though we may think we might not be able to have the strength to do it by ourselves, because we don't do it by ourselves. God gives us the strength and supply. So let us go today relieving ourselves of our anxieties and breathe. Allow us to stay focused, and even though we may get distracted, focus on what is true. And we need to have faith when everything else points the other way. See it through, because God didn't bring you this far to just bring you this far. He has so much more in store for you. Amen.